Rip! The sound of Tyrone Jackson's first-class ticket being torn in half echoed louder than the boarding announcements behind him. Miranda Whitley, a senior flight attendant with Sky Nation Airlines, didn't flinch. Her polished smile barely masked the contempt in her eyes as she looked him up and down. "There must be some mistake," she said coldly, eyeing his tailored Italian suit as if it were counterfeit. "First class isn't open to promotional upgrades." Tyrone didn't say a word. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't argue. He simply blinked. Passengers nearby paused. Some leaned in. Others pulled out their phones, sensing drama. The gate agent looked on, but said nothing. An air marshal shifted nearby. Miranda turned her back. Tyrone's phone buzzed in his hand. A single message appeared on screen from his assistant. Amara acquisition confirmed. You now control 67% of Sky Nation Airlines. Tyrone looked up slowly, measured, and dangerous. "Yes," he murmured under his breath. "There certainly is a mistake." But not his. Before we dive into this story of power, prejudice, and payback at 30,000 feet, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The gate agent didn't speak as Tyrone Jackson stepped aside, holding the two halves of his torn boarding pass like fragments of something sacred that had just been desecrated. His presence measured, immaculately dressed. Poised should have signaled confidence, power. But to the Sky Nation staff at JFK, it seemed to signal threat, or worse, presumption. He didn't argue. He didn't escalate. "Not yet. Please wait in the economy line until we sort this out," Miranda said with a smile that wasn't one, or, "We can reassign you now." The implication was clear. First class was closed to men like him. Tyrone glanced at the long, impatient line forming for economy, then looked past it at the people in first class walking through without issue. A silver-haired white man in a rumpled polo shirt. A white couple laughing as their bags were tagged. Priority. All waved through. No verification. No hesitation. Just acceptance. He took the new boarding pass without a word. 23B burned on it like a brand. As he turned toward the economy gate, the air marshal posted near the counter took a few subtle steps behind him, like a shadow uninvited. Tyrone noticed. Of course he noticed, but still, he said nothing. Each step down the jet bridge felt heavier than the last. Not physically, he was used to traveling light. But this was psychological freight. Centuries old and system deep. He passed rows of first-class passengers already seated, some sipping champagne, others typing on laptops with ergonomic grace. Not a single face like his among them. Row 23 was a different world. No welcome drinks, no hot towels, no name greetings, just worn seat cushions and overhead bins that already bulged like overfed mouths. As Tyrone maneuvered into his middle seat knees, pressing the seat back ahead, elbow space claimed on both sides, his phone buzzed again. A message from Amara. Final contract signed. Board meeting moved up. Legal team ready. He slid the phone into his pocket, exhaled through his nose, and stared forward. The humiliation was deliberate, not loud enough to be called out, but precisely measured to wound publicly and privately, and worst of all, it wasn't new. 10 years ago, he'd walked into a luxury dealership and been told, "This model's out of your range." 5 years ago, At a country club, he legally owned shares in. Someone mistook him for the valet. Even last year, at a private tech summit where he was keynote speaker, a junior exec asked if he was security. Each time, he'd smiled, nodded, let the moment pass, but he didn't forget. He cataloged. He planned. A tray clattered beside him. A voice interrupted the quiet rhythm of his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir, would you like help with your bag?" A flight attendant. Black. Young. Kind eyes. Her name tag read Shauna Williams. "I'm fine," Tyrone said softly, pushing the bag under the seat. Shauna crouched slightly and whispered, "I saw what happened at check-in." Tyrone blinked. "It happens a lot." She continued, "With Sky Nation especially. It's not written down, but we all know what it is." Tyrone met her gaze. For the first time since his arrival at the airport, a trace of warmth touched his face. "Thank you," he said simply. Shauna gave a subtle nod and moved down the aisle. The passenger beside him, a 30-something Asian American man in a frayed blazer, turned slightly. "That was pretty rough back there," he said. "They treated you like a problem." Tyrone glanced over. "I'm James," the man said, offering a hand. "Civil rights attorney. Midwest Civil Liberties Union." Tyrone shook it. "No surprise," James added. "That kind of targeted verification, that's textbook profiling." Tyrone didn't reply. But he was listening. The plane began taxiing. James leaned closer. "If it were me, I'd sue them into the stratosphere." Tyrone finally spoke. "No." James looked confused. "No." A slow breath. A pause. "I'll do something better." As Sky Nation Flight 457 lifted off the JFK runway, the cabin lights dimmed, but the quiet storm around Tyrone Jackson only gathered momentum. From row 23B, the world looked different. Cramped knees, crinkled seatback safety cards, thin air scented with reheated coffee and barely restrained tension. But what truly changed wasn't the legroom. It was the attention. Tyrone was being watched, not just by the man beside him. James Chen, still occasionally glancing his way with curiosity and unspoken admiration. Not just by Shauna Williams, the lone flight attendant who had dared to offer compassion. No, the watching came from everywhere. Across the aisle, a teenager covertly filmed on his phone, whispering to his sister. 2 rows back, an elderly couple exchanged knowing glances after recognizing Tyrone from a Forbes cover they'd seen just last month. Whispers began circulating like cabin pressure. "Is that him?" "That's Tyrone Jackson. From Pinnacle Investments. No way. Why's he in economy?" And then, ping, a notification hit James's phone. "Check this out," he said, turning the screen toward Tyrone. It was a video already going viral. Someone from the boarding line had posted footage of the check-in humiliation, Miranda tearing the ticket, the questioning, the air marshal hovering, the fake overbooking. Captioned, "Black CEO denied first-class seat despite valid ticket. Sky Nations do better. Flying while black." The view count climbed by the second. Tyrone stared at the screen, but said nothing. At the front of the plane, Gregory Pearson, the customer service supervisor who'd parroted protocol like a script, paced the galley with growing unease. He whispered to Miranda, "It's spreading. Someone filmed it." Miranda's eyes darted around the cabin. Who? Doesn't matter. We've got a problem. In economy. Another buzz. James turned his screen again. It's made it to Black Twitter. Tyrone's brows lifted slightly. A new hashtag was trending. First class while black. Beneath it, stories poured in. Same thing happened to my husband last year. Sky Nation bumped him to coach for balance. He's a doctor. I once had to show 3 IDs just to board with a business ticket. They never asked the guy behind me. He was white and wearing cargo shorts. And then my son idolizes Tyrone Jackson. I showed him this video, and he asked, "Why did they treat him like that?" I didn't know what to say. Tyrone scrolled, quiet, focused. Each post added another log to the fire. Meanwhile, up in first class, passengers began murmuring. One woman in designer heels flipped through her tablet, gasped, and tapped her husband's arm. "Babe, look who's in the back." A man in seat 2A muttered, "That can't be real. No airline would be that stupid." A tech bro in a vest scrolled Twitter and whispered to his assistant, "I think we just witnessed a billion-dollar lawsuit in the making." And still, the news spread. By the time the captain announced they were cruising at 33,000 feet, the cabin had become a pressure cooker of speculation. Shauna reappeared beside Tyrone. "I wanted to let you know," she said in a low voice. "The crew's talking. They know who you are now." Tyrone looked up. And she hesitated. "They're scared." "Good." A pause. "What do you plan to do?" He smiled, not out of joy, but out of strategy. Change everything. Back in the galley, Miranda's hands trembled as she refilled a coffee pot. "Why didn't anyone tell us he was that Tyrone Jackson?" she hissed. Gregory rubbed his temple. "Because we don't ask questions when we profile. We just assume." Miranda's lips thinned. Then her phone buzzed. An internal message from Sky Nation's corporate office. "Alert incident at JFK involving VIP passenger is trending. Await further instructions. Do not comment publicly. Legal is monitoring." Miranda slumped against the counter. Legal was involved. Now it was real. In the last row of the plane, a man wearing noise-canceling headphones scrolled through the trending feed, then nudged the woman beside him. "Yo, Sky Nation is gonna be toast after this." She frowned. "Who's Tyrone Jackson?" He chuckled. "Only one of the richest black CEOs in America. Runs Pinnacle Investments. Owns pieces of everything." "But why would he fly economy?" "Because they put him there," the man replied, then grinned darkly. "Bet they regret that now." The whispers had turned into full-blown digital combustion. By the time Sky Nation's PR team issued a lukewarm placeholder tweet, "We are aware of the situation, and investigating the world had already made up its mind." Tyrone Jackson wasn't just a mistreated passenger. He was the symbol. The face, the match that lit the jet fuel. The turbulence didn't come from the clouds. It came from the ground. As Sky Nation Flight 457 sailed smoothly over Ohio, its engines steady and its cabin calm, chaos brewed beneath the surface online, in boardrooms, in whispered group chats between crew, and at 33,000 feet. Tyrone Jackson sat motionless in 23B, absorbing it all with the composure of a man who knew exactly where this was going. In first class, the shift had begun. Passengers who once ignored the commotion at check-in were now on edge. A man in seat 2C, an investment banker from Connecticut, clutched his phone like a lifeline. "What are we supposed to do if he owns part of this airline?" he whispered to the woman beside him. "He doesn't just own part," she whispered back. "Rumor says he's buying Sky Nation." "What?" "I read it. Pinnacle Investments. It's happening today." Their eyes flicked toward the galley where Miranda stood frozen, jaw tight, pretending to tidy the beverage cart. Word had reached her. She was beginning to understand the scope of her mistake. Meanwhile, at Sky Nation's Dallas headquarters, panic was taking root. Boardroom lights flickered on. Emergency meetings were called. In a private Slack channel labeled PR Crisis Priority, executives typed furiously. "We need a statement now. Anyone confirm if Tyrone Jackson is really on that flight. Legal says do not issue apology yet. Stock watch, 1.6% and falling." Victor Reynolds, the CEO, paced his 40th floor office, sweating through his white shirt. He was supposed to tour the airline after the deal closed. He barked into the phone. Who put him on that flight today? No one answered. Because no one had the authority to question Tyrone Jackson. He'd booked the ticket himself. Intentionally, back in economy, James Chen returned from the restroom, sliding back into 23C beside Tyrone. "They're unraveling," he said, scrolling through Sky Nation's news mentions. Public statement just dropped. It's hollow. Lots of valuing all customers and zero tolerance for discrimination, but no apology. "Expected," Tyrone replied. He'd seen this play before. Deny, deflect, delay, but it wouldn't work this time. Because this time, he was the story. Then came the moment that escalated everything. A young white flight attendant named Jordan approached from the front. He carried a tray with bottled water and snacks and forced a tight smile. "Mr. Jackson," he said, voice low. "The captain has authorized us to invite you to the flight deck for a brief visit." The offer was ridiculous on its face. No airline invited economy passengers, especially during cruising altitude, into the cockpit, unless they were scared. Or worse, trying to contain a PR explosion. "No thank you," Tyrone said without looking up. "I'm fine in seat 23B. Jordan swallowed. Understood. He turned and walked away, passing Shauna in the aisle. She raised an eyebrow as she met Tyrone's gaze. He gave a subtle nod. She understood. They were switching tactics now, courting, not crushing. But it was too late for charm. The woman across from Tyrone leaned in. "I just want to say thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not exploding. For staying calm. My husband's black. I've seen what they do when you push back." Tyrone nodded once. That restraint hadn't come easily, but it had come from training. Years of conditioning in boardrooms and newsrooms and investor calls. Smile when insulted. Pause when provoked. Wait for your opening. Then strike so thoroughly that no one even remembers the insult. They only remember the consequences. Behind the scenes, the escalation took physical form. In Chicago, where Flight 457 would land, Amara Washington was already preparing. The emergency board meeting had been moved up. Legal was present. HR was on standby. And the ownership transfer formally completed just minutes earlier was now official. Sky Nation Airlines, for all intents and purposes, now belonged to Tyrone Jackson. Back in the air, James tapped his phone, then glanced at Tyrone. "Do you want to see this?" He turned the screen. Victor Reynolds, on a CNBC call-in interview, was saying, "We regret any confusion, but to our knowledge, all boarding procedures were followed. Mr. Jackson remains a valued customer." Tyrone chuckled quietly. "Valued? They're cornered," James said. "They're buying time," Tyrone corrected. "They still think this can be spun." Another ping. Amara again. Press requests tripling. CNN, MSNBC, even Bloomberg want your comment. We're holding them off. Let me know when ready. Tyrone typed back just 3 words. Let it burn. The sky outside the plane was bright, clear, deceptively peaceful. But inside, Sky Nation Airlines was flying straight into a storm. And Tyrone Jackson was at the helm even if no one had realized it yet. As Flight 457 began its gradual descent into Chicago, the cabin lights flickered from warm to neutral. Most passengers leaned back, drifting into post-meal silence or checking emails on patchy Wi-Fi. But in 23B, Tyrone Jackson sat still, shoulders squared, posture upright, lost in the shadows of memory. Because this wasn't the first time someone had tried to define his place. It was just the most public. His mind traveled back to Harlem, 1989. 10-year-old Tyrone stood beside his father outside the barber shop. Jackson and Sons. 1962. That day, he'd returned home from school with a certificate in hand, first place, Junior Business Fair. He'd designed a mock company that sold custom sneaker designs, paper prototypes, made from cereal boxes. The principal smiled politely. The judge nodded absently. The white boy who came in second got invited to a summer startup camp. Tyrone? He got a pat on the head and a reminder to stay humble. Later that night, his father crouched beside him, his hands calloused from decades of cutting hair. "You remember this feeling?" his father asked, resting a hand on young Tyrone's shoulder. "That's excellence. Don't let them trick you into thinking you didn't earn it." Tyrone had nodded. And he had never forgotten. Decades later, he could still feel that hand on his shoulder. Still hear the laughter of a bank manager in Brooklyn who once denied his father a small business loan despite perfect credit because the neighborhood's metrics weren't ideal. Tyrone had watched his father walk out of that bank with dignity intact and rage buried deep. "They'll never give us an even playing field," his father had said. "So what do? We buy the field." And that's exactly what Tyrone had done again and again. His career had been one long campaign of silent conquest. MIT, Harvard Business School, his first tech startup in a garage, his first $10 million exit before age 30, Pinnacle Investments before 40. By 45, a net worth north of $4 billion. By 46 board seats in companies across 3 continents. And now Sky Nation Airlines. The irony tasted bitter. He was sitting in seat 23B, knees brushing the tray table, because a flight attendant didn't recognize the face on her own pay stub's ownership disclosure. "Coffee, sir?" The voice snapped him back. Shauna Williams again this time with a paper cup and a glance that said more than words could. "I remember your MIT speech," she said quietly. "Watched it on YouTube last year. You said, 'When excellence walks into the room wearing dark skin, it shouldn't need a business card.' Tyrone smiled faintly. Guess I should have brought one anyway. No, she said firmly. You shouldn't have to. That moment, tiny, sincere, pierced deeper than a press release ever could. 3 rows back, a white passenger who had been covertly filming since takeoff uploaded a new video. Tyrone Jackson demoted to economy. Airline says standard procedure. You believe that watch his face. The video panned to Tyrone sitting silently, eyes forward, expression unreadable. The tweet read, "Black wealth doesn't shield you from black reality." It exploded within minutes. Retweets from civil rights leaders, shares from celebrities, discussions on morning talk shows. By the time the plane hit 10,000 feet, Tyrone's dignity had already been dragged across millions of timelines. But what they didn't see was the steel beneath the silence. James Chen leaned in again. "Have you ever thought of running for office?" he asked. Tyrone raised an eyebrow. "You're building a movement right now. Whether you planned to or not, I don't run for seats," Tyrone replied. "I buy seats. Then I change the room." James nodded, half impressed, half intrigued. "I've never seen someone sit in economy like they own the cockpit." Tyrone didn't blink. "Because I do." Down below, at the O'Hare Executive Terminal, Amara Washington had already arrived. She stood flanked by legal counsel, HR leadership, and the interim head of Sky Nation's newly formed ethics oversight team. The conference room had been booked under the alias Boardroom Omega. Inside, sealed folders, printed transcripts, and termination packets ready for activation. Her phone buzzed. "Descent beginning. ETA. 18 minutes. Everything was in motion. Back in the sky. Tyrone checked his watch, then his phone. A message from his father. Just 3 words. "Make it count." Tyrone stared at it longer than he meant to. He knew what was coming next. The reckoning wasn't about vengeance. It was about standards. And this time, the standard would be his. When Flight 457 touched down at O'Hare, the usual thud of tires meeting tarmac felt more like a war drum than a welcome. Tyrone Jackson remained seated as others sprang to retrieve their bags. His fingers drummed once against the armrest. Not from nerves. From rhythm. Everything was on schedule. In the terminal, Amara Washington stood outside a glass-walled conference room at the Marriott O'Hare. Her Bluetooth headset flickered to life. "He's landed," came the voice from security detail. "Copy that," she replied, stepping inside. Inside, the room buzzed with silent tension. HR Director Marcus Washington flipped through a dossier of Sky Nation personnel. Shauna Williams, now off duty and dressed in business casual, sat beside him, tapping nervously on her knee. James Chen, the civil rights attorney who had volunteered his legal expertise, scanned news headlines on a laptop. "Over 1 million views now," he said. Amara didn't blink. "It'll double by the time he speaks." Back at the jet bridge, passengers filed out. Tyrone stood last. Gregory Pearson, the customer service supervisor, and Miranda Whitley, the very attendant who tore his ticket, stood near the cockpit door, both now painfully aware of who Tyrone was, both sweating despite the air conditioning. "Mr. Jackson," Gregory said with a strained smile, "is there anything else we can assist with today?" Tyrone adjusted his sleeve cuff. "Yes, I'd like to speak with the station manager. Immediately, Gregory paled. I'm sure customer relations. Tyrone cut in, calm but firm, not interested in compensation, interested in accountability. His words echoed. The tension was no longer just social, it was structural. The meeting that followed moved fast. The Chicago station manager, Diana Foster, was summoned within minutes. Tyrone introduced himself, shook her hand with cool formality, and made one statement that changed everything. As of 2:17 p.m. Central, Pinnacle Investments finalized its acquisition of Sky Nation Airlines. I'm now your employer. Diana froze. Gregory swallowed hard. Miranda's knees buckled slightly. Tyrone gestured to the awaiting SUV. We'll be debriefing at the Marriott. You three are coming with me. 15 minutes later, a black Suburban pulled up outside the Marriott. Inside, silence reigned. No one dared speak. Shauna watched from the 12th floor window as the SUV arrived. They're here, she said softly. James looked up. Then we begin. The elevator opened. Tyrone stepped out first, flanked by two silent aides. Amara met him at the door. Boards waiting. Legal team online. HR standing by. Termination protocols preloaded. And sir, your press conference has just been scheduled for tomorrow morning. Where he asked. The Sky Nation hangar at O'Hare. He gave a single nod. Perfect. In the converted conference room, the table had been restructured. Pinnacle executives occupied one side. Sky Nation's legacy board members sat awkwardly opposite. Tyrone didn't sit yet. He stood at the head. For those unfamiliar, I'm Tyrone Jackson, he began, CEO of Pinnacle Investments, and as of today, Executive Chairman of Sky Nation Airlines. He paused, and this morning, I was publicly humiliated by two employees in front of witnesses and cameras. What they didn't know was that I had already acquired the airline. Silence. He continued. This meeting is not about personal vengeance. It is about structural reform. Then he gestured to Miranda, Gregory, and Diana. These individuals will help us understand how this culture took root. The quiet mobilization had begun. Miranda was called in first. She fumbled through excuses, citing policy, protocol, and instincts. Then, under pressure from HR Director Marcus and Attorney James, she cracked. Look, nobody tells us to do it. But there's pressure. To keep first class looking a certain way. What way Marcus pressed? Miranda hesitated. Then, a whisper. Not like him. The admission was damning. And recorded, next came Gregory. Polished, practiced, and full of plausible denials. But when presented with internal data disproportionate verifications of minority passengers, he faltered. I just do what Dallas tells me. If Dallas told you to discriminate, James asked, would you? Gregory froze. That silence said everything. Meanwhile, Shauna had taken a side office and begun identifying allies within the flight crew. We need names, Amara told her. The ones enforcing this, and the ones suffering in silence. Shauna nodded. I've got 5 already. They're scared, but they're ready. Then we protect them. Amara replied. No retaliation, just elevation. By 7 hours Tyrone had heard enough. 9 terminations drafted. 5 internal promotions prepared. A full structural audit greenlit. And the blueprint for a new company culture had emerged, crafted quietly by those who had once been silenced. In the hallway outside the boardroom, Shauna approached Tyrone. "You really meant it?" she asked. "About changing everything." He nodded. "No performative training. No empty apologies. We start at the root, and we build a new Sky Nation." Shauna smiled. "You'll need help. You're hired." By morning, the air in Chicago felt heavier not from weather, but from momentum. What started as an isolated incident had become a corporate fault line. Tyrone Jackson, now executive chairman of Sky Nation Airlines, stood at the center of a storm of his own making. And outside the Marriott O'Hare, the media had begun to arrive. Inside the makeshift command center, the tempo was relentless. Amara coordinated press access. Shauna interviewed internal staff for a systemic culture report. James Chen fine-tuned language for the coming public address. Even the hotel staff seemed to sense it. There was something different about these people. Not panicked, not vindictive, just relentlessly precise. At 8:30 Amashubur, Sky Nation's former CEO Victor Reynolds sent a blast email to remaining executives. "Remain calm. The incident is overblown. Legal is monitoring. Maintain business as usual." It was laughably out of sync with reality. Tyrone read it once, smiled thinly, and deleted it. Business as usual is what dies today. Meanwhile, on the airline's private employee forum, tensions were rising. Dozens of staff posted cryptic messages. "I heard we're all getting fired. Whitley's gone. Seriously. Is the new boss really that Tyrone Jackson?" And then, anonymously. If you've ever targeted a passenger based on vibes, start updating your resume. In the executive suite, Shauna entered holding a laptop. Internal employee boards are blowing up. They know something's coming. "Good," Tyrone replied. "Let the anxiety float upward." Amara entered behind her. "Legal just confirmed all NDAs for executive terminations are watertight. PR response plan is locked. You're clear to address the press in 30 minutes." Tyrone exhaled once through his nose. Let's make sure they understand what accountability looks like. Down in the Sky Nation hangar, a podium had been erected in front of a gleaming Boeing 787. Behind it, journalists assembled CNN, MSNBC, the Wall Street Journal, even local news trucks. The visual was deliberate. This was not about revenge. This was reconstruction. Tyrone stepped up to the mic at precisely 9 Zors. "Good morning," he began, his voice carrying. "Yesterday, I was denied my rightful seat on a Sky Nation flight. What followed was not a misunderstanding. It was the consequence of a culture that deems some people worthy of dignity and others questionable by default." Flashbulbs burst. Microphones leaned in. "This isn't about my personal insult. It's about the countless others who've endured the same treatment with no camera, no leverage, and no recourse." He laid out the data complaints ignored, passengers profiled, careers derailed. Then the solution, effective immediately. 9 executives have been removed from leadership. Sky Nation will implement mandatory anti-bias training, establish a diversity oversight committee, and perform a top-down review of all customer service policies. And then, the high point. He motioned toward Shauna Williams, now standing confidently behind him. This is Shauna Williams. She stood for truth when it wasn't safe. Today, I appoint her as Sky Nation's Chief Diversity Officer. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Shauna stepped forward, stunned but steady, a flight attendant no more. Now, an architect of reform. The media erupted. Mr. Jackson, is this about personal revenge? No, he said. It's about systemic correction. A reporter from a conservative outlet pushed forward. Are you saying these employees were racist? I'm saying they participated in a system that punished the wrong people for the wrong reasons. And now that system will change, or it will collapse. As the press conference wrapped, hashtags surged online. Flying with dignity. Sky Nation reform. First class for all. And behind the scenes, pressure continued to build. At Sky Nation's Dallas headquarters, middle management scrambled. Files vanished. Emails deleted. Whispers of retaliation swirled. Victor Reynolds was holed up in his office, consulting crisis PR firms and political contacts. But the tide was against him, and worse, he could feel it. Back in Chicago, James pulled Tyrone aside. We're getting resistance from Dallas. Leaked Slack messages. A whisper campaign starting against you, claims of reverse discrimination. Fox News is already preparing a segment. Tyrone didn't flinch. Let them. This could escalate lawsuits, investigations, maybe even shareholder pushback. Tyrone stepped closer. Let them come. He turned back to the press corps, now dispersing. This is what it looks like when power gets uncomfortable. In that moment, every executive watching from behind tinted windows understood something vital. Tyrone Jackson wasn't simply reacting, he was orchestrating. And the pressure he applied didn't come from outrage, it came from precision. Cold, calm, relentless. By noon, the tone across Sky Nation's infrastructure had shifted from confusion to fear, and now to rebellion. Not against Tyrone Jackson, but against the system that had failed them all. It started in whispers, internal Slack threads, DMs, subtle nods between employees who had been waiting for anyone to name what they had all felt. For years, the culture was rotten. The system was rigged, and someone had finally said it on camera, into microphones, with consequences. Tyrone returned to the Marriott conference suite, where his crisis team had now evolved into a command center of reform. Amara greeted him with fresh reports. Shauna's inbox exploded over 500 messages from staff across departments, many thanking her, some volunteering for the new oversight committee. Shauna, still in shock from the public announcement, simply nodded. They're calling it the rebrand uprising, she said, voice low. James Chen looked up from his laptop. Even legacy staff are turning. One VP just sent us an internal email chain executives mocking the diversity policy proposals. Tyrone's eyes narrowed. Name? Logan Kessler, VP of Fleet Operations. Pull his file. Across Sky Nation's offices in Dallas, Atlanta, Newark, and Denver, employees met in quiet corners. Customer service agents shared stories of being told to use discretion when assigning upgrades. Flight attendants recalled being reprimanded for being too lenient with passengers who didn't fit the premium profile. Black, Latino, and Asian employees swapped glances in break rooms, recognizing what had long been unspoken. They had been enforcers of a brand that subtly told them they didn't belong. Now, they wanted out of that role, or to burn it down. In the Chicago hangar, something extraordinary happened. An aircraft mechanic named Luis Torres approached Tyrone directly. "I've worked for Sky Nation 16 years," he said. "I've seen good people shut out of leadership, watched promotions passed over for guys who golf with the VP." He paused, then added, "Tell me where to sign. I'll help rebuild." Tyrone offered his hand. "Welcome to the future." Simultaneously, marketing teams scrambled to respond to the social avalanche. The Sky Nation website had become a battleground. Dozens of emails poured in per minute. Some angry, others grateful. Many asking the same question: are these changes real? How can we support the new direction? Will the new leadership actually listen? To answer, Tyrone did something no airline executive had ever done. He went live. From the conference room, Tyrone sat before a single camera. No filters, no prep. "Today, I speak not as a businessman, but as a passenger," he began. "Sky Nation Airlines failed me, but more importantly, it failed you." He laid out the reform plan in plain language. All customer service procedures under review. A third-party audit of discrimination patterns. Open calls for staff feedback without retaliation. Promotions based on integrity, not legacy. Then the high point. In 30 days, we'll reintroduce ourselves to the world under a new name, not Sky Nation. That name no longer deserves your trust. We will earn a new identity, one that reflects what we truly stand for. The live chat exploded. Rebrand with purpose. New wings. Ascend Airlines. The uprising had a banner, and now it had a mission. In the room, Shauna was speechless. James Chen leaned back. "You realize what you just did?" Tyrone turned to him. "I didn't fire a company. I just started building one." That night, boardrooms were quiet across competitor airlines. Delta, United, American, executives whispered, "What if our customers ask for this too?" Stock analysts debated whether Tyrone's hard pivot was visionary or suicidal. But employees at Sky Nation had stopped debating. They were choosing sides, and Tyrone had just handed them a flag to rally behind. Meanwhile, Victor Reynolds fumed in Dallas. He stood in his penthouse office, watching Tyrone's live stream play on loop. Change the name, he spat. Sky Nation is the brand, but he already knew the truth. Sky Nation was dead. Ascend Airlines was being born in real time. And the man who had once been denied a seat now sat at the head of the most significant airline rebrand in modern history. A screen doesn't blink. A graph doesn't flinch. A dataset doesn't lie, especially when compiled by someone determined to reveal the truth. At precisely 6 hours the next morning, Tyrone Jackson stepped into the war room adjacent to the Marriott suite. Half the team was still in wrinkled clothes and nursing half-cold coffee. The energy wasn't fatigue. It was momentum. Amara stood beside a 60-inch monitor, flanked by Shauna and Marcus. "We finished analyzing the last 3 years of Sky Nation boarding records," Amara announced. "The numbers are even worse than we expected." Tyrone nodded. "Show me." Slide after slide appeared on the screen, color-coded heat maps, time-based charts, internal survey results. James Chen, seated beside Tyrone, leaned forward. This isn't just damning, it's surgical. Amara tapped her tablet and a pie chart expanded. Out of 2.3 million first-class passengers across domestic routes, only 3.1% were Black, she explained. Compare that to 11.2% of the eligible flying population statistically. It's impossible unless there's bias built into the system, Marcus added. More than 78% of those denied upgrades or flagged for ID verification were Black or Latino, many with matching ticketing records, frequent flyer status, or corporate accounts. Tyrone raised an eyebrow. Passenger-facing data. Shauna stepped forward. I compiled internal notes. She held up a tablet, notated remarks from attendants, terms like high alert, monitor closely, and verify payment, all disproportionately assigned to passengers of color. It was the smoking gun, not hearsay, not interpretation, cold, brutal numbers. Numbers that broke through plausible deniability like a hammer through glass. James said it aloud. This is how you take down institutional racism on paper. Tyrone remained still for a beat. Then he said quietly, We go public. An emergency press advisory was issued. At 10:00 a.m., Tyrone stood once more at the podium in the Sky Nation hangar, now bearing a new temporary banner, Ascend in Progress. He addressed the waiting press. Yesterday, I promised transparency. Today, I deliver it. Behind him, screens illuminated with the data Amara had presented hours earlier. No organization is immune from prejudice, but until now, Sky Nation denied it even existed. Today, I present you with proof. He stepped aside and let the numbers do the talking. Charts, quotes, percentages, disparities, then the high point. He pointed at the final slide. 0 verified complaints resulted in disciplinary action over 3 years. Let me repeat that, he said calmly. Not one case of documented discrimination was acted on by this airline's leadership. That ends now. The press exploded. CNN ran a live ticker. Jackson unveils systemic bias data. Bloomberg headlined, CEO turns airline inside out. Social media tagged every slide, every quote. But inside Sky Nation's corporate offices, a fire alarm went off figuratively and almost literally. Calls from external law firms jammed Victor Reynolds' line. Board advisors demanded explanations. The HR director who had buried most complaints quietly deleted files and disappeared from Slack. An internal revolt was brewing not from the bottom this time, but from the middle. At the Marriott, Shauna received a call from a flight attendant in Atlanta. They're pulling logs, trying to scrub things. You need backups. We already do, Shauna replied. They're printed, archived, and time-stamped. The power of preparation wasn't just in proving guilt. It was in being unshakable when the guilty tried to rewrite history. Meanwhile, Tyrone received a text. Unknown number, Mr. Jackson. My name is Evelyn Cross. I'm a former VP of Customer Experience. I was forced out last year after raising bias concerns. I have internal emails you'll want to see. Can we talk? He replied with 3 words. You're hired. Immediately. The next 3 hours were spent building what Amara coined the Ascend Protocol, a digital library of every discriminatory instance verified by their team. A living document, an archive, a legacy of proof. Then Tyrone made another decision. "We'll release it all." James looked up. "Even the executive emails." "All of it." Shauna paused. "You realize that's nuclear?" "Yes," Tyrone said. "But sometimes that's what justice takes." At 3 UNs was PSAPs. The Ascend Transparency Report went live. A 97-page PDF hosted on Sky Nation's homepage, uncensored, unattributed, and damning. Within an hour, civil rights groups issued formal commendations. Airline competitors scrambled to review their own data. And a viral video emerged. Tyrone standing silently in 23B, spliced with chart after chart. Captioned, "This is what excellence looks like when it refuses to stay silent." The data had spoken, and this time, the world couldn't look away. The sun over Chicago had barely dipped beneath the skyline when the air inside Sky Nation's Dallas headquarters turned toxic. Emails flew. Phone lines jammed. Executives ducked into closed-door meetings while assistants exchanged wide-eyed glances. The 97-page Ascend Transparency Report was no longer just a press scandal. It was a detonation, the kind that ruptures careers, rewrites policy manuals, and stains reputation so thoroughly they can't be power-washed clean. Tyrone Jackson sat back in a leather chair at the Marriott's War Room, reviewing live updates. The numbers on screen shifted faster than any earnings report. Website visits 2.4 million in 4 hours. Twitter reach trending #1 worldwide. Investor sentiment mixed but climbing customer support inquiries. Record high, many supportive. James Chen, standing beside the live feed, crossed his arms. "We've entered uncontrollable virality. This is where it stops being a story and becomes history." Tyrone nodded. "And the old guard won't go down without a fight." He was right. At 6:42 p.m., a video dropped posted on an alt-media YouTube channel with a clickbait title. "Exclusive fired flight attendant breaks silence. Says she's the real victim." Miranda Whitley sat in a dimly lit living room, hair pulled back, eyes brimming with faux vulnerability. "I was just doing my job," she said. "I never saw his name. I was told to verify everyone in first class. But I guess that's not enough when you're a rich man with an agenda." She sniffed for effect. "I've received death threats. My children are afraid. And now I'm being labeled a racist for doing what Sky Nation trained me to do." The comments section was predictably divided. "She's lying. The data proves it. This is just cancel culture run wild. Typical. Play the victim after doing the damage. She deserves to be heard, too." The backlash Tyrone had expected was finally here. But he didn't flinch. He clicked off the video. Then he stood. "Get me Reynolds." Victor Reynolds, Sky Nation's now sidelined CEO, answered on the second ring. "I suppose you've seen it," he said. "I've seen it," Tyrone replied. "And now I need to know how deep you want to dig this grave." Reynolds huffed. "You've already burned the house down. Now you want to lecture me on fire safety." "This isn't about fires, Victor. It's about rot. And unlike you, I don't build on mold." A long pause. Then Reynolds asked, "What do you want?" "The truth. Publicly. Now. You can't be serious. I'm not requesting. I'm documenting your refusal. Click. 20 minutes later, Victor Reynolds appeared on CNBC's Executive Hour. It was supposed to be damage control. It turned into gasoline on the flames. He sat stiffly, sweat beading beneath pancake makeup. With all due respect, he began, "This entire ordeal has been sensationalized. Our staff follow standard procedures. The statistics being circulated lack appropriate context. Mr. Jackson has a personal vendetta, and he's using his platform to orchestrate a hostile rebrand." The interviewer blinked. "But you issued a zero-tolerance statement. The transparency report shows 78% of profile checks were against minority passengers." Reynolds smiled nervously. "Statistics can tell any story. The real issue is the rush to crucify airline professionals doing their jobs." The fallout was immediate. 3 major civil rights groups publicly condemned Reynolds's remarks. Sky Nation board members began leaking internal memos to distance themselves from the now toxic executive. And then, in a move no one saw coming, 2 major institutional investors pulled out of Sky Nation stock, citing ethics misalignment and brand volatility. At the Marriott, Tyrone's phone buzzed. It was Amara. They blinked. How badly? 3 board resignations in the last hour. Reynolds just lost internal backing. "Perfect," Tyrone said. And then he turned to Shauna. "Prepare the succession letter. Reynolds is finished." At 800 B's Metrons M. The final tipping point arrived via a push alert from Bloomberg. Breaking: Victor Reynolds removed as CEO of Sky Nation amid discrimination fallout. Just beneath it, a photo of Tyrone Jackson at the podium from the day before, captioned, "From passenger to powerhouse." The man who grounded a Goliath. But the most symbolic moment came not from a headline, but from a 6-second clip filmed by a Sky Nation employee in Atlanta. The company's logo formerly displayed in the staff lounge was being taken down. A replacement banner lay waiting on the floor, bearing a new emblem, a stylized phoenix wing wrapped in silver and navy blue. The rebrand was no longer conceptual, it was physical. Ascend Airlines was real, and everyone, friend, enemy, or undecided, could feel it. The calm that followed Reynolds's ousting was deceptive, like the quiet before cabin lights flicker and oxygen masks drop. At Sky Nation, turbulence didn't just return. It intensified. In the absence of clear leadership, the old guard scrambled for relevance, clinging to policy memos, outdated protocols, and whisper networks now exposed under fluorescent lights. And at the center of this growing storm, Tyrone Jackson tightened his grip not with volume, but with vision. At 7:00 a.m. sharp, Tyrone convened the Post-Crisis Transition Council, a 12-person task force comprised of ethics officers, legal advisors, union reps, customer advocates, and, by his personal invitation, Shauna Williams. They met in a restructured executive conference room inside the newly renamed Ascend Airlines Transformation Wing, a former HR office now repurposed with minimalist lighting and glass walls. Amara began the session. First item: turbulence reports. Marcus Washington, HR Director, flipped open a binder. We've had 38 anonymous whistleblower complaints submitted since the transparency report dropped. He continued reports of middle managers deleting files, coaching staff to avoid saying the wrong thing, and, in some cases, retaliating against employees who've come forward. Tyrone absorbed this, unmoving. James Chen spoke up. That's obstruction. It's not just policy resistance, it's legal exposure. Amara didn't miss a beat. Shall we escalate? Tyrone answered with just 2 words. Public audit. Less than an hour later, Ascend Airlines issued a formal notice. All internal complaints will be reviewed by a third-party ethics firm. Any attempt to delete, alter, or retaliate will result in immediate termination and possible legal action. That single memo sent a shockwave. In offices from Dallas to Detroit, faces turned white. The era of quiet cover-ups had ended, and a new word echoed through employee chat groups' watch list. But turbulence wasn't limited to staff. Outside the company, a faction of conservative media seized the narrative, spinning the scandal into a broader ideological war. Headlines screamed, "Woke takeover of American Airlines. CEO cancels white employees, reverse racism in the skies." On morning talk shows, panelists debated Tyrone's reforms without context, cherry-picking quotes, displaying Miranda Whitley's tearful interview on a loop, and inviting Victor Reynolds to peddle revisionist history. And at the heart of it all, a question that kept resurfacing. Is this accountability or revenge? Tyrone saw it for what it was, the system pushing back. The air always fights the plane when it climbs, but he didn't slow down. He doubled down. "Shauna," he said, during an afternoon strategy session, "we need visibility on internal resistance." "I've got something," she said. She pulled up a spreadsheet. Color-coded names, departments, behavioral flags. Red dots are managers discouraging compliance. Yellow are those who claim confusion. Green, early adopters. Tyrone studied it carefully. So the infection is still active. Yes, but the antibodies are multiplying. James leaned over. You're turning a culture war into a data war. Tyrone nodded, because data doesn't argue on cable news. That afternoon, a new blow landed. The company's reservation system experienced a sudden outage, causing delays at 14 airports. Initial reports blamed a server patch, but a deeper look revealed something more troubling. A line of malicious code inserted by a senior IT administrator who had been part of Reynolds's executive circle. It was no glitch. It was sabotage. Amara's voice was ice-cold as she read the internal report. Designed to slow seat reassignments and disrupt the new equitable upgrade algorithm, Marcus cursed under his breath. James looked at Tyrone. That's criminal. Tyrone didn't raise his voice. Press release. Full transparency. 2 hours later, Ascend Airlines made the hack public. The message was clear. We have uncovered a deliberate act of internal sabotage designed to undermine seating equity reforms. The employee responsible has been terminated and referred to federal authorities. Within minutes, the story trended globally, drawing praise from civil rights leaders, transparency watchdogs, and thousands of Ascend passengers. But not everyone applauded. A new online movement began gaining traction under the hashtag #GoStopThePurge. Former executives and anonymous insiders began framing Tyrone's actions as a revenge campaign, accusing him of firing people based on political correctness. Fox News aired a panel titled, "Has Airline Accountability Gone Too Far?" The pushback was loud. angry, strategic, but ineffective, because as the haters screamed, something else was happening in silence. Applications to ascend airlines were skyrocketing. Thousands of resumes poured in, many from qualified minority professionals who had never even considered the airline industry before. Employees from Delta, United, and even tech firms messaged Shauna privately. "I want to work somewhere that looks like the future. Your policies made me cry at my desk today. If you're hiring, I'm ready." At midnight, Tyrone stood alone in his office, overlooking the Chicago tarmac. One plane took off every 3 minutes. He watched as an Ascend jet lifted into the night sky. The company was still turbulent, still noisy, still under siege. But it was moving forward, and every foot of elevation meant one thing. The air was getting thinner for those who'd clung to the ground. By week's end, it wasn't just outsiders pushing back. The real test of Tyrone Jackson's transformation plan came from within, from employees caught in the crossfire between loyalty to the old regime and conscience. These weren't saboteurs. They were the undecided, the ones who had said yes to biased policy because saying no might have cost them their jobs. Now, they stood on a line drawn in corporate sand, wondering which way to step. In the Denver regional hub, Flight Supervisor Andrea Morales stared at an email on her screen. From Chief Ethics Officer, Ascend Airlines subject, Disparity Review, Interview Request. "We'd like to speak with you regarding past upgrade decisions under Sky Nation's legacy policies." Her stomach twisted. She had followed those policies for 8 years. She had denied upgrades to passengers based on profile checks. She had flagged ticket anomalies when someone didn't look the part, not because she believed it was right. Because that's what the job had become. Now, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. The same dilemma rippled through maintenance hangars, gate counters, and corporate desks across the country. Ascend's internal reporting tool lit up with confessions. "I participated in ID checks that I now know were racially biased. I want to be part of the new culture, but I'm scared I'll be fired for the old one. How do I move forward when I was complicit?" Tyrone read every report. Not to punish, to understand. Because accountability without redemption wasn't leadership. It was vengeance. And vengeance was not the mission. In the transformation suite, Shauna Williams met with Tyrone, James, and Marcus. "We've got hundreds of mid-level employees frozen," she said. "Some are paralyzed by guilt. Others are scared of retaliation. And a few are just waiting to see who wins." Marcus added, "We're at the line where reform becomes real or reverts to fear-based compliance." Tyrone thought for a moment. "Then we create a bridge." 2 days later, Ascend Airlines launched a new initiative, Project Reset, a voluntary program allowing legacy employees to participate in recorded truth and repair sessions, admit past actions under old policies, commit publicly to the new mission, join retraining and reform efforts, rebuild trust without immediate risk of termination. The tagline was simple: confess, commit, contribute. Andrea Morales was one of the first to enroll. Her recorded session was raw. "I denied a black veteran an upgrade last year because he was wearing a hoodie. I assumed wrongly that he was gaming the system. I followed procedure, but it was wrong." She paused. "I can't undo that, but I can make sure it never happens again." Her statement was anonymized, then published with consent as part of the internal culture library. Overnight, 238 more employees signed up. But not everyone embraced the bridge. At the Fort Lauderdale gate, a group of 5 senior attendants refused retraining. This is political. One declared on the internal forum, "They're turning every mistake into a crime." They submitted a group resignation letter and leaked it to the media. Fox News ran the headline, "Ascend Airlines pushes out experienced staff in name of wokeness." Tyrone didn't respond publicly, but privately. He told his team, "Let them leave. The exit door opens as easily as the front one." In contrast, another movement formed inside the company, the Recommit Circle, a grassroots employee group, multi-ethnic, multi-department, who pledged to mentor new hires, report bias when they saw it, educate others on the reform mission, and uphold a shared vow, dignity at every seat, for every soul. Within a week, over 1,000 employees joined. The cultural tectonic shift had started. Not from orders, but from ownership. The high point came unexpectedly. In a Seattle all-hands town hall, a white gate agent named Cole Jensen raised his hand during Q&A. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice trembling. "I've upgraded passengers based on appearance. I've smiled at the white ones and questioned the black ones. Not out of hate, just habit." The room fell silent. Then he added, "I'm not proud, but I'm not hiding. I'm here, and I'm ready to do better." Someone clapped. Then another. By the time Cole sat down, the entire room was standing. Tyrone watched the footage later that night. No press, no cameras, just humans choosing to change. He leaned back, speaking to no one in particular. That's what legacy looks like. They didn't collapse all at once. The old guard of Sky Nation fell like dying satellites burning bright in denial, then vanishing quietly into accountability's atmosphere. Their titles had once carried weight: Senior Vice President of Passenger Strategy, Director of Policy Enforcement, Chief Communications Liaison. But now, those names appeared on red-marked HR reports and legal briefings under a single shared line: recommended for termination ethical misconduct. It began with a subpoena. Victor Reynolds, ousted CEO, had filed a wrongful termination lawsuit. But in doing so, he cracked the door Tyrone Jackson needed most access to internal documents beyond what his acquisition team had uncovered. Within days, the legal team found them: emails, chats, presentations. A digital paper trail laced with arrogance. One message from a former director of brand alignment read, "Let's make sure first class stays first class. You know what that means." Another, between 2 supervisors. If they complain about profiling, just smile and reference TSA standards. Works every time. The patterns were undeniable. The tone, smug, untouchable, until now. Tyrone held a printout of the worst exchange between Miranda Whitley and Gregory Pearson, dated 9 months prior. Passenger in 2B keeps asking about upgrade denial. Black guy. Loud. Probably bluffing. Run the overbooking script. Toss him in economy. Keep the cabin clean. Got it. Clean it is. He stared at the phrase, not because he didn't expect it, but because of how deliberate it had become. That same day, Amara coordinated a special session of the newly established Ascend Ethics Tribunal, an internal disciplinary board empowered to review and vote on permanent removals based on evidence. The meeting was held in a conference suite redesigned for transparency glass walls, open mics, and mandatory recordings. James Chen, serving as lead compliance officer, laid the foundation. These aren't isolated messages. They reflect a coordinated effort to systemically exclude passengers based on visual assumptions and cultural bias. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is corporate malpractice, Shauna Williams added. Some of the terminated staff are trying to reframe this as an overcorrection, but those emails, that's not standard procedure. That's design. In 3 hours, the tribunal voted unanimously to recommend the final removals. 10 names. 9 with executive titles, all of them from the Reynolds era. Their badges were deactivated by 6 Andres P. Security escorted them from terminals around the country. Some left in silence. Others didn't go quietly. One VP, removed from the New York office, yelled, "This is a witch hunt," as passengers in the terminal stared, recognizing his face from viral articles. In Dallas, a cluster of dismissed directors staged an impromptu press conference outside a corporate law firm. Cameras captured them holding signs, "Experienced, unwanted." Political purge, not progress. Sky Nations dies woke airlines rise. But the images didn't stir sympathy. They trended as memes. Meanwhile, the replacements were already walking in. Marcus led a private onboarding session for 12 new department leads. Most had come from outside aviation tech, hospitality, logistics. All of them brought 2 traits: integrity and lived empathy. Shauna stood before them at the end of the session. "You're not just replacing bad policy," she said. "You're representing a promise that our values fly as high as our planes." The dramatic high point came not from an executive, but from a quietly powerful voice. Evelyn Cross, the former VP of Customer Experience who had been forced out for raising bias concerns, stood on stage during a company-wide live broadcast. Her return to Ascend had been confirmed that morning, rehired with full title, Retroactive Equity, and now reporting directly to Tyrone. She spoke slowly, each word chosen like stone on steel. "I warned them," she said, "years ago. I told them passengers were being profiled, upgraded based on skin tone, dismissed for asking why." Her voice didn't tremble. "They told me I was too sensitive, that I was seeing shadows, so they silenced me." She turned to the camera. "To every employee who was told the same, this is your vindication." Applause erupted throughout multiple Ascend hubs where employees watched live. And in that moment, the collapse was complete. Not through scandal. Through succession. That night, Tyrone walked through Terminal C at O'Hare. He passed a large glass display formerly showcasing Sky Nation's executive legacy wall. It was empty now. A cleaning crew was removing the final photo, Victor Reynolds, grinning in front of a Boeing 777. Tyrone paused. Then continued walking, his reflection trailing him in the dark glass. The old guard was gone. The air was different now, lighter, cleaner, ready for what came next. 3 weeks after the storm, the dust had finally begun to settle, but what remained wasn't rubble. It was foundation. At the former Sky Nation headquarters, now rebranded Ascend Global Operations Center, the walls had been repainted, the signage replaced, and the toxic scripts of the past scrubbed from every desk manual and training module. But Tyrone Jackson wasn't celebrating. He was planning, because removing a broken structure was only half the battle. Now, it had to be rebuilt with purpose. He stood at the center of the transformation suite, surrounded by whiteboards, LED screens, and people who had proven themselves in fire. Amara presented a rollout timeline. Phase 1 is complete terminations, transparency, truth and repair sessions. Phase 2. Tyrone asked. She tapped her tablet. Culture re-engineering. Departments, he asked. All of them, she replied. That meant a full overhaul. Training manuals rewritten with equity-centered case studies. Onboarding processes infused with historical context and human empathy. Performance evaluations redesigned to reward fairness as much as efficiency. Feedback loops created so frontline employees could report abuse upward. And at the center of this rebuild stood two towering changes. The Elevation Academy Ascend's new internal university for employee development. The Passenger Equity Protocol. A formal system that monitored real-time customer interactions for bias patterns. These weren't slogans. They were systems, because as Tyrone had long said, what you don't measure, you don't change. At O'Hare's Terminal B, the first Elevation Academy class assembled. 30 employees, gate agents, flight attendants, mid-level managers filed into a room redesigned like a startup innovation lab. No desks, just round tables, open space, light everywhere. Shauna stood at the front. Behind her, a banner that read, "We're not correcting a scandal. We're launching a standard." She began with a story. 3 months ago, I watched a black father in a tailored coat get questioned over a seat he bought. He was calm, dignified, and he was still treated like a problem. Pause. That father wasn't famous, but what we do here is for him too. The room nodded in silent agreement. At the executive level, Tyrone invited a group of outside experts, civil rights leaders, DEI scholars, behavioral economists to conduct empathy stress tests on Ascend's policies. One expert posed a single scenario. A black teenage girl with long braids upgrades to business class. She's traveling alone. A white attendant questions her ID, then leans toward the phrase, "Do you belong here?" She looked around the room. What does your system do in that moment? Tyrone leaned in. It flags the incident before it happens using pattern recognition, passenger data, and a culture trained to notice microaggressions before they bloom. The expert blinked. You built preemptive dignity. No, he said. We're still building it. The dramatic high point came at the quarterly shareholder meeting. Institutional investors had braced for fallout. But what they witnessed instead stunned them. Tyrone stood before them with hard numbers. Customer satisfaction up 34%. Employee retention improved by 21%. Recruitment pipeline tripled in diversity. Brand Trust Index surpassed Delta and American for the first time ever. And then came the mic drop. He revealed the results of a post-rebrand customer poll. When asked if passengers felt treated with dignity across all classes of service, 84% of respondents answered, yes. That's a 52-point increase from 6 months ago. Silence. Then applause, not polite. Stunned, A black CEO hadn't just saved a company marred by bias. He had made it better than it had ever been. Afterward, one of the more conservative board members approached Tyrone privately. "I'll admit, I thought you were too aggressive at first. Too fast. Too loud." Tyrone smiled faintly. "I wasn't loud," he said. "The silence before me was just too deep." Meanwhile, inside the Ascend app, a new feature went live. Passengers could now report real-time experiences anonymously, not just to staff, but to a public-facing dashboard. Every complaint was logged. Every resolution was tracked. No PR spin, just honesty. And in the comments section, a user named Flygirl1987 wrote, "I've flown every major airline. Never felt invisible until I didn't. Ascend made me feel seen. That's all I ever wanted." That evening, Tyrone returned to his apartment. He sat by the window with a glass of sparkling water and watched a plane ascend into the Chicago sky. Its new livery gleamed under the sunset. Ascend Airlines. A new altitude of accountability. He whispered to himself, "Let them say we rebuilt from ashes. Just remind them, we flew afterward." Just as the skies began to clear, a cold front formed on the horizon. Not from inside Ascend Airlines. From beyond it, 6 weeks into Tyrone Jackson's transformation, a coordinated resistance began to stir, not loud, not obvious, but strategic. It didn't come from disgruntled employees. It came from former power brokers, political operatives, and corporate allies of the old Sky Nation regime people who had built careers on backroom handshakes, not transparent dashboards. And now, their influence was unraveling. The first strike was legal. A multi-plaintiff lawsuit appeared in federal court, filed by a coalition of recently terminated executives. The allegation: targeted racial and ideological purge. The suit framed Tyrone's restructuring as reverse discrimination, using language like cultural cleansing and hostile DEI takeover. The timing was precise, just before Ascend's second investor briefing, and 2 days after new passenger satisfaction ratings had broken records. Coincidence, hardly. James Chen reviewed the filing from his legal desk. "It's coordinated," he said. "Same counsel for all plaintiffs. Funded through a PAC tied to Reynolds's former donors." He looked up at Tyrone. "They're not just trying to win a case. They're trying to undermine your legitimacy publicly." Tyrone didn't blink. "Then we don't counterpunch," he said. "We counter-document." At Tyrone's direction, Amara assembled the internal legal justification archive, a line-by-line database correlating each termination with documented policy violations, customer complaints, or internal audit data. Every action, every reason, every fact. Nothing emotional, just receipts. The second strike came via media. An op-ed appeared in a national paper, authored anonymously. The Tyrone Doctrine. When corporate accountability becomes authoritarian rule. The piece painted Ascend's reforms as forced thought, radical overcorrection, and a threat to shareholder rights. Cable networks picked it up. Morning shows debated it. A senator even quoted it on the Senate floor. Tyrone had expected pushback. But not from elected officials aligning themselves with ousted airline executives. That's when he knew. This wasn't backlash. It was backlash with a budget. Meanwhile, another front opened employee fatigue. Not rebellion, but attrition. Several mid-level managers, overwhelmed by the pace of reform, quietly exited the company. Some cited burnout. Others said nothing, but their absence left gaps. And in those gaps, whisper networks returned. It's too much. I liked the old way better. He's trying to fix everything too fast. Shauna caught wind of it during a leadership lunch in Atlanta. They're not resisting you, she told Tyrone. They're resisting discomfort. Tyrone nodded. Same thing. In the end, then came the high point. An internal memo leaked from a senior HR administrator, one who had remained through the transition. It read, I believe in the vision, but people are scared. They feel like any mistake will make them the next headline. We're building trust from a platform of fear, not faith. The message wasn't malicious. It was honest. And it hit Tyrone harder than any lawsuit, because it wasn't wrong. He called an emergency leadership roundtable. Executives, managers, supervisors. No podium, no live stream, no branding, just chairs in a circle. And one microphone passed hand to hand. I know you're tired, Tyrone began. So am I. A pause, but I need you to know this isn't a sprint. It's a rerouting. And on reroutes, you don't blame the storm. You adjust the flight plan. Then he said something no one expected. I've made mistakes. I assumed justice moved as fast as clarity. It doesn't. Silence. But we don't slow down because of resistance. We recalibrate. And if I've set the throttle too high, that's on me. But the destination, that stays. One by one, the leadership team responded. Shauna spoke first. You gave us voice. That buys patience. Marcus added, we need to train our trainers to carry this culture, not just execute it. Even a regional manager who had privately criticized Tyrone admitted, I wanted old normal comfort, but I see where we're going now, and I'd rather be uncomfortable than irrelevant. The next morning, Tyrone issued a company-wide message, not a memo, but a video, seated plainly in front of an Ascend backdrop. He acknowledged the pressure. He reaffirmed the mission, and he introduced a new initiative, Velocity versus Sustainability, a recalibration strategy that allowed for pacing adjustments without compromising the vision. No one gets left behind, he said, but no one stops walking either. The results were immediate. Voluntary overtime jumped. Leadership engagement increased. Employee trust ratings climbed by 11% in 3 days. Resistance didn't disappear, but it was transformed into something harder to weaponize: dialogue. Tyrone ended that week standing in a quiet jet hangar. An Ascend technician passed by and saluted with a grin. Still flying, Mr. Jackson? Tyrone smiled. Always, even through turbulence. When the resistance declared its position, Tyrone Jackson didn't just respond. He counterstruck, but this wasn't retaliation. It was strategy. He understood what most of his critics didn't. Public opinion doesn't swing by force. It shifts through story, through structure, through systems that, once revealed, can't be unseen. And now, Tyrone would use the very tools of corporate power: legal structure, public narrative, data fidelity, to make sure the old ways didn't just lose, but couldn't come back. It began on a Sunday. Quiet on the surface. But behind closed doors at Ascend's Chicago headquarters, Tyrone convened his top 5 executives, 3 external advisors, and 1 former federal prosecutor. On the table documents, dashboards, a whiteboard covered in red marker. This, he said, tapping a folder, is no longer internal sabotage. This is a coordinated attempt to delegitimize a legal restructuring using proxy litigation, political media, and regulatory noise. Amara laid out the timeline. A conservative law firm had filed parallel lawsuits in 3 states. A Senate committee was probing Ascend's post-acquisition ethics compliance. Whisper campaigns falsely claimed that over 1,000 employees had been purged, the real number 86. It wasn't just noise, it was disinformation with teeth. That night, the Ascend defense doctrine was drafted. A 12-page counterstrike plan that included transparency bombing, preemptively publishing all lawsuits filed against Ascend, with annotated legal facts and counterclaims. Data immunization, public dashboards showing employee retention, diversity metrics, and promotion equity in real time. Narrative ownership, a video miniseries titled Altitude, sharing employee testimonies of transformation from within. Policy lockdown, legal reinforcement of the equity mandate in Ascend's corporate charter, making it irreversible by future executives without supermajority board approval. James Chen looked at Tyrone. If we deploy this, there's no going back. You'll have made your reforms a matter of corporate DNA. Tyrone nodded. That's the point. On Monday morning, transparency bombing went live. A bold red tab appeared on Ascend's website, Legal Challenges Read for Yourself. Inside, PDFs of every lawsuit annotated in plain language lined a digital gallery. Every claim, every rebuttal, every precedent cited. It wasn't spin. It was a public audit, and it worked. By noon, public trust in Ascend rose 8%. Even skeptics had to admit no company had ever published its own lawsuits like open source code. That afternoon, the Altitude series premiered on YouTube. Episode 1, From Silence to Systems. Shauna's story. In it, Shauna recounted her 5 years at Sky Nation, the culture of quiet compliance, and the moment she handed Tyrone a glass of water in economy. I didn't know I was handing a drink to the man who'd changed the industry, she said, but I knew he deserved better than what I'd seen happen to him. By midnight, the video had 1.2 million views. In the comments, "This is how you reform from the inside. Other CEOs need to take notes. This just restored my faith in flying." The dramatic high point came 2 days later. At a scheduled deposition in Dallas, one of the fired executives, Gregory Pearson, broke under cross-examination. Facing mounting evidence from Ascend's internal documentation, Pearson admitted on record. Yeah, we flagged passengers based on how they looked. There was pressure. We were told to preserve the premium image." The admission was leaked within hours. And it crushed the opposition's narrative, because now, the very people crying reverse discrimination had confirmed what Tyrone had exposed. The old system was discriminatory by design. And the new system a threat only to those who benefited from silence. That evening, Tyrone met with Evelyn Cross, now reinstated as VP of Passenger Experience. "What we're doing now," she said, "is bigger than flying." "I know," Tyrone replied. "It's about the altitude of expectations." She smiled. "You've got a line for everything, don't you?" He didn't smile back. This one's not for the cameras. The Ascend brand began its climb. Media that once questioned his methods now praised his clarity. 3 major corporations invited Tyrone to keynote upcoming conferences on equity and structural reform. A Harvard Business Review article labeled his transformation the gold standard in justice-led business practice. And in industry circles, the term the Ascend Playbook began appearing in strategy decks and consulting pitch books, but the greatest victory came quietly. In a private Slack message from a junior employee, sent late at night, "I used to hide who I was at work. Now I bring all of me. Thank you for that." Tyrone replied with 3 words: "Keep ascending. Always." They didn't plan the moment. It wasn't staged. There were no podiums, no PR handlers, no pre-cleared talking points. Just an open runway, a grounded plane, and a spontaneous gesture that sent a louder message than any press release ever could. It became known, in company lore and later in classrooms and keynote speeches, as the tarmac truth. The morning began like any other at Chicago O'Hare. Gate C9 buzzed with the quiet tension of an early boarding first-class passengers lining up, agents scanning, attendants greeting with mechanical smiles. On the tarmac below, flight attendants conducted safety checks. But this wasn't just any flight. It was Ascend 451, the first route to feature the new crew, a team trained under Ascend's reform protocols, selected from the Elevation Academy's pilot program, and composed of one of the most diverse lineups in the company's history. Media had been invited to report. Bloggers and aviation influencers had hyped the story for days. Yet Tyrone Jackson hadn't intended to be there. He wasn't part of the itinerary. He was supposed to be in Dallas preparing for the next earnings call. But at 5 Zatron, something pulled him to the airport. He arrived with no entourage. Just a dark coat, a leather briefcase, and a quiet presence that still turned heads. He stepped through security, walked to the gate, and paused near the window where passengers gathered. Some whispered, others stared. A woman in a green sweater stood, walked over, and said simply, "Are you the man who made this possible?" Tyrone didn't smile. "I'm just the man who refused to stay seated." As the plane taxied to position, something unexpected happened. The Captain Lina Zhou, one of the first Chinese-American women to command an Ascend long-haul flight, radioed the tower and requested a 90-second hold. She unbuckled, walked to the cabin, and picked up the intercom. "Good morning. Passengers, before we depart, we'd like to acknowledge someone on board, not as a celebrity, but as a catalyst." A murmur rose. Then, from the front, she continued, 6 months ago, this airline wasn't safe for every passenger or every crew member. Today, we begin rewriting that, because he rewrote the rules. She walked to row 2A and turned toward Tyrone. A spontaneous ripple of applause broke out. Not dramatic, not choreographed. Just human. The captain reached into her pocket and revealed something small, an old Sky Nation name badge with Tyrone's name crudely scrawled across it in Sharpie. "I kept this," she said. "After watching the video of you being moved to economy, I kept it to remind myself what silence costs and what courage looks like." She placed it in his hand. "I don't fly for Sky Nation anymore," she said. "I fly for Ascend, and I thought it was time. You did too." The crew stepped aside. The jet bridge door reopened, and without planning, without anyone requesting it, Tyrone Jackson walked down the tarmac. Not as a CEO, not as a passenger, but as a man reclaiming space that had once told him, "You don't belong here." Someone filmed it. Just a 6-second clip. Tyrone walking calmly under the wing of the plane as the sun broke over the tail fin bearing the new Ascend logo, a stylized upward wing, while the crew saluted from the doorway. The clip hit social media within minutes, and within hours, it went viral. The caption read, "He walked, so others could fly right." Back inside, Amara watched it from a conference room in Dallas. She didn't cry often, but she blinked hard now. James Chen entered, saw the clip, and simply said, "That's the story." Shauna called moments later. "You saw it. Everyone did." Amara replied, "That wasn't a walk. That was a truth." By evening, news networks ran the headline, "The walk heard around the world Ascend CEO walks tarmac to mark reform flight." Commentators debated whether it was symbolism or substance. Aviation experts called it unprecedented, but passengers felt it. A man who had once been denied a seat now walked the ground that carried millions toward destinations they hoped would treat them better. It wasn't marketing, it was memory management. And every employee, critic, or onlooker who had ever doubted the depth of Ascend's reform paused, because sometimes the most powerful message isn't spoken in boardrooms. It's taken one step at a time, right there, on the tarmac. By the time Ascend 451 landed at LAX, it wasn't just passengers who had changed altitude. It was the company's soul. The tarmac walk had gone global. News anchors debated its symbolism. College professors dissected it in business ethics courses. Activists pointed to it as a rare moment where corporate power did something radical. It apologized, it changed, and it kept flying forward. But for Tyrone Jackson, redemption wasn't about a moment. It was about legacy. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. The turbulence, the lawsuits, the whisper campaigns, the resistance from entrenched gatekeepers began to thin, not because it disappeared, but because the air around it had changed. Public sentiment had calcified, not in his favor. In favor of the idea he represented. That dignity wasn't a reward. It was a right. And every seat on every plane should know it. Shareholders once wary now leaned in. Ascend's Q2 earnings beat expectations by 14%. Employee turnover dropped to record lows. Passenger complaints, especially around upgrade bias and customer treatment, plummeted 61%. A mid-level analyst from JP Morgan put it best. It turns out, doing the right thing is good business if you mean it. But the true measure of redemption wasn't found on spreadsheets. It was found in two small, deeply personal letters delivered to Tyrone's office. The first came from a 12-year-old girl named Olivia Green in Detroit. Her mother was a baggage handler for Ascend. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Jackson, my mom used to come home sad from work because people yelled at her and bosses ignored her. Now she comes home smiling. She says you made her job feel important. I want to work at Ascend too when I grow up. Can I sit in first class one day sincerely? Olivia Green P. S. I like your beard." Tyrone smiled for the first time that week and called HR. He created a new company scholarship fund in Olivia's name. The second letter came from a former Sky Nation pilot, retired. White, 64 years old. He had been part of the old way, but never fully embraced it, just tolerated it, until it finally broke him. His letter read, "I didn't have your courage. I watched it happen, passengers downgraded for looking unusual, crew being punished for defending them. Bias turned into policy. I didn't speak, but I see now that silence was complicity. Thank you for not staying silent. You changed more than a company. You changed me. Paul G." Internally, Ascend leaned into its redemptive arc. New hire orientation included a 30-minute documentary titled Before the Flight. The story of how Ascend took off. Employees from every level shared personal testimonies, and Tyrone. He never narrated a single line, because redemption wasn't about centering himself. It was about proving that structural change didn't require saviors. It required systems and commitment. At JFK, the original gate where Miranda Whitley had torn Tyrone's ticket, something symbolic happened. A new art installation appeared, a bronze sculpture of a passenger standing silently at a gate briefcase in one hand, boarding pass in the other. No plaque, no name, just a phrase etched at the base. Let them doubt you. Just don't sit down. It became a selfie spot, a symbol, and a reminder. The high point came at the Ascend Global Town Hall. Broadcast live to all 57,000 employees across 60 airports, 19 hubs, and every corporate office. Tyrone stood on a simple platform, no branding, no suit, just a navy sweater, slacks, and a single note in his hand. "I want to thank you all," he began, "not for enduring the turbulence, but for choosing the sky anyway." He paused. Redemption is not granted by shareholders, PR teams, or press. It's earned through decisions, through accountability, and through the courage to rewrite a system while still living inside it. He looked directly into the camera. 6 months ago, this company denied me a seat. Today, I don't want the seat back. I want to make sure no one else ever loses theirs again. The room went quiet, then erupted. In Atlanta, a crew applauded mid-boarding. In Seattle, baggage handlers clapped beneath the wing of an outbound flight. In Newark, a customer service rep cried, not because it was polished, but because it was real. That night, in his home office, Tyrone pulled out the old torn boarding pass, now laminated in glass. It sat beside Olivia's letter and Paul G's note. He didn't frame it out of pride. He framed it because it reminded him, redemption isn't about restoring the past. It's about rewriting what comes next, and the runway was clear. It began like any other flight, a clear sky, a smooth taxi, passengers filing in with earbuds and neck pillows and quiet expectations. But for Ascend Airlines Flight 700, departing from JFK to San Francisco on the anniversary of the company's rebirth, nothing about it would be ordinary. Not to the passengers, not to the crew, and certainly not to Tyrone Jackson. Because this flight would mark the moment when a journey that began in humiliation and silence would complete its arc with power, peace, and purpose. At 7:12 a.m., Tyrone boarded without announcement. No press, no camera crew. No first-class entourage, just a black sweater, a copy of The Souls of Black Folk tucked under his arm, and a ticket stamped Seat 2A. The same seat he had once been denied. This time, the crew recognized him. But no one made a scene. They simply nodded. Respect without performance. He nodded back. Dignity without instruction. He settled into his seat and looked around. To his left, a young Latina coder headed to a tech conference. To his right, an elderly Asian couple flipping through a photo album. Across the aisle, a white teenager with noise-canceling headphones and a chess app open on his phone. First class no longer looked like wealth. It looked like everyone. As the flight ascended through a band of golden morning light, Tyrone glanced out the window and thought not about the battles he'd won, but the ones he chose not to fight. The moments he could have retaliated, but instead restructured. The names he could have blacklisted, but instead retrained. The systems he could have dismantled in anger, but instead rebuilt in justice. That was the lesson. Not every broken thing needs to be burned. Some things are better re-engineered. At cruising altitude, a flight attendant approached. It was Shauna. Not in uniform, she wasn't working today. She'd chosen to ride this flight as a passenger. "I had to see it," she said quietly, taking the seat across from him during her upgrade courtesy. "See what?" "What it looks like," she said, "when the plane doesn't just fly, but the whole system rises with it." She handed him a slim folder. Inside employee testimonials from the Elevation Academy's most recent cohort. Each page told a different story. A gate agent who no longer feared speaking up. A pilot who used to downplay her Indian heritage, now mentoring others proudly. A trans mechanic promoted based on performance, not politics. Tyrone read them slowly. "This," he said, "is what currency looks like when it's measured in trust." The high point came mid-flight. Captain Lena Jo Samewoman, who had paused a departure weeks earlier to honor Tyrone's leadership, came on the intercom. "Good morning from the flight deck," she began. "You may not realize it, but today's flight is historic. 1 year